Chapter 5, May 1953, Los Angeles. John swigged from the large tumbler of cognac. It went down like milk, smooth and silky, yet didn't ease either the dryness in his throat or the ache in his heart. With his unshaven face and bloodshot eyes, half sitting and half lying in the booth, he looked like a common drunkard and out of place in the posh tavern. One hand waved erratically over his head, signaling for another drink. The bartender hesitated, unsure. He didn't want any trouble so early on a Friday afternoon, although the bar was fairly quiet. "Another," John ordered, his voice rising as he slapped a hand on the table. "Another round, sir." The words were still clear, not slurred, so he wasn't too drunk yet. The bartender set a fresh glass in front of him, eyeing him cautiously. John sighed and emptied the glass. At least the cognac relaxed his brain and soothed his pounding head. He lit a cigarette and then let it burn unnoticed as his head dropped nearly to the table. He was fairly drunk now, but still remembered every word his father had said earlier. I know. Zoe is lovely. I like her too, and would love to see you two get married one day," said Henry, looking up from his crossword puzzle. But I promised. I will wait for her, or I'll go to China and marry her there. I don't mean to upset you, but you have to face reality. She won't come back, and it's unlikely you'll be allowed into China. John felt lost, adrift, without a letter from Zoe in nearly 2 years. The U.S. had no communist Chinese embassy, no government agency where he could seek help. For all he knew, she was married or even dead. Neither a possibility he wanted to consider. So, he'd gone to visit his father in Connecticut for advice. He leaned on the windowsill, looking for something to distract him. Like so many places around the country, New Milford was brimming with patriotism. The house across the street displayed both the U.S. flag and a pair of army boots on the veranda. He turned away, knowing the family had someone fighting in Korea. Everywhere he looked, even here, he saw only reminders of his separation from Zoe. "Sid's parents just came back from Shanghai. You know his father was the priest at Holy Trinity, one of the prominent churches there, and he speaks fluent Chinese. Maybe you should go visit them and listen to what they say." "What do they say?" John asked dully, turning to face his father. "That the Communist Party is anti-religion and anti-Western. Especially now, with the Korean War, it's even more extreme. Virtually all Westerners have been kicked out, particularly Americans. The Chinese government hates us. They call us a paper tiger, and nobody dares to associate with any Westerners. Sid's parents were bitterly disappointed that when they left China, none of their local friends came to see them off." The pain and frustration on John's face reminded Henry of when his wife died. More than 12 years later, he was still working through that grief. How could he expect his son to overcome this trauma so soon? He knew how like him John was, passionate, sentimental, and persistent to a fault. However, he didn't want to see John become a recluse. He was too young to be like this. "It doesn't surprise me that she's given up on you. I'm sure she wanted to marry you, but the communist regime isn't big on personal freedom. My guess is she had no choice." He looked at John's set face and tried another tack. "I've organized a little party for your birthday. Veronica will be there. She's dealing with loss too, you know. Her husband died in Korea 6 months ago." John shook his head, angry and pessimistic. "Father," he started to say he didn't want to be set up with Veronica again, but he held back. After all, he'd come to his father for help and advice, and Henry was doing his best. With an effort, he nodded. Thanks. Before the visit, John still believed he could find a solution and bring Zoe back. By the time he left, he felt himself under a death sentence, a martyr awaiting crucifixion by the Communist Party. On the long train ride across the country, he could think of nothing else. He knew in his heart she would never abandon him. It couldn't be her choice to not come back. But then why didn't she write? Loving her was not wrong, he was certain. But letting her leave was an unforgivable mistake. What a fool he was. A wise man would have convinced her to stay, kept her out of danger. His love for her had become a daily torment. His entire life felt distorted, twisted out of shape. He couldn't concentrate on work and spend his nights longing for the feel of her hand in his. He knew he had to eventually face reality and sort out his life. Was it time to admit their love was nothing more than fantasy? After 2 days on the train, last night he finally gave up hope, succumbing to hours of silent tears until he eventually fell into an exhausted sleep. Now, half drunk and weary in both body and soul, he wanted only to get out of Los Angeles and back to his apartment in Berkeley and into bed. Maybe I'll just stay there the rest of my life, he muttered into his glass. He leaned back, tipping the last drop of brandy into his mouth. As the glass thumped back on the table, he felt the alcohol in his gut and didn't bother trying to suppress the belch, loud enough that the bartender gave him a disgusted look. He paid no attention, but just slapped his money on the table and walked out unsteadily. He stood outside the door for a few minutes, trying to orient himself. It was a beautiful sunny day, but his eyes wouldn't focus properly. He blinked several times, squinting against the glare until he got his bearings. Across the street stood the city hall, and he needed to get to the train station behind it. For some reason, a large crowd had gathered in front of the building, blocking traffic in the street. What on earth? Oh, who cares? He thought, and stepped onto the road. With faltering steps, he tried to weave through the crowd. Nobody paid any attention to him. They were too busy shouting. It took him a moment to make sense of their protests. "This is murder! They're innocent! Save the Rosenbergs! Clemency, Mr. President! We want justice!" Unable to see his feet in the crowd, he tripped over a sign propped up on the street and bumped into a middle-aged protester. She turned on him, shrilling, "You drunkard! Watch yourself!" Her shove sent him stumbling backward, knocking other protesters aside as he flailed, lost his balance, and slammed into the pavement. He lay on the ground, his body aching, but the sudden shock cleared his head, and he saw the sign the woman was holding. "If we die, it will be the murder of innocent people. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg." Bloody Rosenbergs. Somehow, he managed to stand up, swaying unsteadily. He pointed at the sign and swore loudly, "They're communists! Spies! Death to the rats!" The woman turned with a cry and started bashing him on the head with her sign. A man nearby grabbed his shirt and punched him repeatedly. The peaceful demonstration quickly devolved into chaos, with John becoming the central target of the protesters who, screaming and cursing, surrounded him. Completely unprepared for the attack, John couldn't defend himself. He put his arms up to ward off the blows, but collapsed again under the assault. The protesters were persistent, continuing to pummel and kick him. He cowered on the ground, curling his body into a ball and trying to protect his head with his hands. Amid the confusion and noise, he heard a piercing whistle. But before the police reached him, a man stepped out from the crowd. He was tall and fit, with a receding hairline and a high, bare forehead that gave him a slightly surprised look. By contrast, his brows were thick and dark, and the eyes below were sharp and alert. He pulled John to his feet, elbowing the protesters aside so abruptly that one man backed up several steps and sat down hard on the ground. As he turned to lead John away, he stopped and stared at him momentarily, like a doctor examining a patient. 5 policemen suddenly surrounded them, ready to remove the troublemaker. Without hesitation, the man flashed a badge. CIA. He held John's arm firmly, holding him up. We've been following this man for some time. He's coming with me. Amid a chorus of cheers, he half-dragged John away from the crowd. John awoke slowly, unsure of where he was or how he got there. The pangs in his stomach and the fading light from the window told him it must be near dinner time. Lamplight streamed through a narrow gap by the door, but gave him only limited visibility in the room. He heard singing from what he supposed was a radio, as well as muted voices chatting nearby. The man's voice was familiar. His parched mouth and the throbbing in his head told him the wooziness was a hangover, so he must have been out for some time. As soon as he tried to sit up, though, pain racked his entire body. He sat on the edge of the bed until he mustered the energy to stand up and open the door. Just down a short hall, he found 2 people sitting at a dinner table. They both turned and looked at him with broad smiles. "You're finally awake. I thought you'd make me sleep on the sofa another night," said the man, standing up. "Harry, it's you!" John hugged him with as much fervor as if they were still in school and had just won the rugby championship. "You weren't at our last reunion, so I thought you must have moved. I didn't think you were still in Los Angeles." John gave him a friendly punch on the shoulder. Harry laughed. "Yes, still here. I'm the one who kidnapped you." John couldn't help but laugh with him. They had been close in high school, both playing on the rugby team. Their fathers had worked together at a military hospital during World War II and were also good friends. With his interest in politics, Harry had gone on to study foreign relations at UCLA. The last John had heard, he was working for the State Department. "You must be hungry, and we just started eating. Would you like to join us for dinner?" asked Harry. John glanced at the table. The young lady smiled at him, inviting him to take a seat. He suddenly felt starved and nodded vigorously. He pulled out a chair and sat next to Harry, happy but confused. "How did I get to your place?" "You don't remember?" asked the young lady, already on her way to the kitchen. Her short hair was nicely trimmed in the latest fashion, which suited her. Her amused expression embarrassed him, and he gave an awkward grin, waiting for Harry's explanation. "You remember Marion, don't you?" Harry said. "She just finished her degree and starts work at a primary school soon." John gaped. "That's Marion? I thought she must be your new girlfriend." He peered after her in shock. "Wow, she's really grown up since I saw her last." Harry waved his hand to dismiss the topic. "So, tell me, why on earth did you join that demonstration on Thursday?" "What demonstration?" "Pro-Rosenberg's, at City Hall." Harry shook his head. "You were too drunk to remember, I guess, even after those protesters beat you up." John caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror on the opposite wall. His face was swollen and stained with bruises, and patches of gauze crisscrossed his forehead. Gently probing the bruises with his fingertips, he winced. Not too bad, bearable, although the pain brought back some of the memories. "The Rosenbergs deserve the death penalty. They get no sympathy from me. They're spies for the Russians, and I hate all communists." He paused, feeling uncertain and uncomfortable. He patted his pockets, looking for a cigarette. Harry pulled a pack from his pocket, lit one, and gave it to John, who inhaled deeply before continuing. Communists can't be trusted. They destroy innocent people, innocent lives. Communism is ravaging the world. Just look at what's happening in China. Harry's eyebrows went up in surprise at John's sudden vehemence. John was usually the stereotypical scientist, laid back and easygoing, with little interest in politics. Something's happened. What's changed? Since the Communist Party took over, they've kicked Westerners out. They sent their troops to Korea. They don't care about the rest of the world. God only knows what they'll do after Korea. We understand how our use of nuclear weapons ended World War II and ultimately saved lives. But just imagine what the world would be like if the Soviet communists get atomic bombs. They'll use the weapons to coerce the entire Western world, with help from traitors like the Rosenbergs. It won't take the Russians long to make bombs. And then what do you think will happen? The Soviets can export nuclear technology to China, just like they exported the Communist Revolution. It's a chain reaction. Together they'll keep spreading it further and further. But this chain reaction has the capacity to destroy all of mankind. He stopped and took another long drag on his cigarette. No, my gut feeling about the Rosenbergs is very bad. I don't know what you think. Maybe I'm just paranoid after what happened to Zoe and me. What happened? It's a long story. I don't think I want to go into it right now. Good at knowing the right moment to press, Harry deftly redirected. Do you really believe that the Rosenbergs passed nuclear secrets to the Soviets, and the information was vital enough to help them produce a nuclear bomb? John grunted but didn't elaborate. Harry stared at him, waiting for a clear answer. It's not really so hard. We can make one, and the Russians will make one too, sooner or later. So let's just sit around and wait for their bombs to drop on us, and in the meantime, we live in perpetual fear of sudden, absolute destruction. Pearl Harbor will be repeated over and over, but on a massive scale, in every one of our major cities. His answer gave Harry pause. You sound very pessimistic. What do you expect? Harry nodded. John's perspective confirmed his own beliefs, which means we need to find a new method of defense, a way to protect against the destructive use of nuclear power. John shook his head. I don't think that's achievable. In the past, science has often been able to provide protection against new types of weaponry, but the aggression of nuclear weapons is so far beyond our ability now, and I'm afraid I'm not a very good cook, interrupted Marion. She set a plate and cutlery in front of John. Hope you like it. Fish. I love fish, said John, shoveling in mouthfuls. Delicious. The salad is great too. I love avocado in a salad. John was so concentrated on his food that he didn't notice the sudden quiet in the room. When his stomach finally felt satisfied, he lifted his eyes to find both of them looking at him, smiling and waiting patiently, both their plates already empty. He ducked his head, embarrassed. Sorry for acting like a hungry tiger. Don't worry about it. Harry picked up the bottle on the table. Glass of wine? No, thanks. John turned to Marion. Do you have anything non-alcoholic? Orange juice? Yes, please. She's very attractive, John commented as Marion disappeared through the kitchen door. Harry smiled and filled up his own glass. So, if you don't mind, I repeat my earlier question. If you don't support the Rosenbergs, why did you join the demonstration? I just got back from Connecticut, visiting my father. I didn't expect communist mobs to block my exit from the railway station. John paused as Marion came back and handed the juice to him. Thank you. Before he could continue his story, the doorbell rang, and Marion jumped up from her chair. It's Sam. Time for me to go. Pulling on a red coat, she was gone in seconds, flitting out like an elegant bird. Enjoy your evening. Don't be home too late, Harry called just before the door clicked and shut behind her. Still playing mother hen to her, I see, John chuckled. She's still like a child in some ways. Loves parties and going places, Harry explained, as if Marion were his daughter instead of his sister. The silence in the room lengthened and deepened, both immersed in their own thoughts. How is your father? Harry started up again. Oh, he's fine. Still working at the local hospital. And how is Zoe? John shook his head, the depths of his melancholy evident on his face. What happened? Harry had met Zoe twice and thought she and John were a perfect match. I was in Germany when I got your engagement invitation, so I couldn't attend. But I hoped to be there for your wedding. There won't be any wedding. Zoe is gone. John heaved a sigh. For a while he sat smoking and staring at nothing. Harry waited without prodding him further. When he finally opened up, the story poured out like water from a bucket, unstoppable. Harry listened and nodded, not asking anything until John finished his miserable tale, and fell into another morose silence. I think your father is right. The Korean War has made the relationship between Communist China and the US so bad there's no way for her to get out of China, or for you to get there to bring her back. And I reckon the war will drag on for at least another 10 years. Then I'll wait 10 years. But even after that, the Cold War will continue between communism and the free world. Plus, how likely is it that Zoe will wait for you for another 10 years? John looked at Harry miserably. I can't just give up on her. She's with me, always, wherever I go. At Berkeley, in my apartment, on the street. You have to move on. Take a break. John's eyes posed the question that his voice refused to speak. What do you mean? Leave Berkeley. Move out of your apartment. You have too many connections, both of you, to the university and the city. A new job will help you make a fresh start. John had always liked Harry's sharp, intelligent, probing mind, and ability to be simultaneously diplomatic and optimistic. Do you have something specific in mind? He asked carefully. You finished your doctorate in nuclear and physical chemistry, right? Almost 2 years ago. Now I'm working on molecular abnormalities and cells that cause cancer. I have some connections at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Would you consider working there? John hesitated. He knew Livermore was a US nuclear weapons facility and wasn't sure he wanted to directly participate in such research. Let me think about it.